this topic. I often have described Islamic finance as best understood through two lenses. And this is a description I give to people who are involved in financial services. One is it's a form of ethical finance, and you will find a lot of the faith groups and faith communities have been at the forefront of ethical finance across the history of ethical finance over the last 200-300 plus years in Europe, at least for sure. So it's a form of ethical finance where you cannot invest and engage in certain activities in sectors deemed harmful to society. So that's the first lens. The second lens, which you need to layer on top of that, is a bit more of a challenge, and it's best understood as a structured financial product. And what I mean by that is the ban on interest, the ban on riba. Often in today's world, it's nearly inconceivable. How can you ban interest and have a banking market? How can you ban interest and have any form of financial capital markets? Because interest is so widespread and taken as the norm. However, according to IOFI, the scholars on IOFI board, which is based in Bahrain, the global board that governs Islamic finance, the majority of scholars agree that riba is translated as interest, although there is some minority opinions as translating that as usury. But the majority do agree that it is translated as interest. And we know from prophetic traditions and hadith that it's mentioned words to the effect that towards the end of time, riba will be so widespread that even if you try to avoid it, you'll be touched by the dust of it. So we see in today's banking and financial systems that interest is fundamentally included across the whole sector, and it's nearly impossible, some argue, to avoid it. So that's why you have to look at and apply a second lens, a bit of a structured product, as to how do we operate within the fundamental tools that Islamic finance allows us to have and allows us to use. Those are tools such as equity, investing, where you share in the risk and the return. Those are tools such as rent. You are allowed to rent and receive income through rent. And the simple trading mechanisms of buying and selling. So cost plus relationships that you have in murabaha transactions or in ijara rent structure. So there's a combination of all of these tools and techniques have been used by the Islamic banking market since the 1970s. And what it looked to do was to create an Islamic alternative to existing financial products. So the industry very much started, I would argue, on the basis of adaptation, of creating an alternative, a Sharia compliant alternative, and it's very much focused on the commercial side of things. So Islamic finance should not ever be confused with the world of charity, the world of just sadaqah or zakat and so on and so forth. Our Islamic economic system encompasses all of these components, but the global Islamic banking and finance world is focused purely on the commercial side, which is where people are looking to seek a return. Whether those people are shareholders or they are depositors or they're individuals like you and me who are looking for returns on our savings because we're saving for our children or we're saving for Hajj or we're saving for a future event. That's the world of the contemporary world of Islamic finance, an industry which is now growing globally and is around $2.5 trillion plus. And it's been a fascinating growth. I often state in the UK, it's the only part of Islam which the government across the Labour and Conservative spectrum has been proactive and changed the laws for to accommodate. So I think there's a lot there that can be taken and understood by the journey of Islamic finance, which might be able to be, lessons that might be able to be applied within other areas like the world of, the world of maybe pharmaceuticals and Islam and so on and so forth. So it has really been a most fascinating experience. And I think it's given us particular insights as well, insights which are now being, insights into challenges which are now being faced by the mainstream conventional banks in the world of ESG and ethical economy. And I'm going to talk about that in detail later, but I'll take a more conventional lens on that. I think those insights very much are around the way the Islamic finance industry has created stock screens to layer on top of investment stocks, equities, and also the role of Sharia governance, how this additional component of governance has entered into the banking world. And we saw from the global financial crisis the damage that the banking world did across continents to bring down markets, sort of the unchecked behavior of certain banks. But this additional layer of governance by bringing in religious actors into otherwise a commercial outfit has been extremely fascinating as well in how it has checked certain negative behaviors, which we've seen in other conventional financial institutions. So Islamic banking ultimately, as I said, contemporary attempt since the 1970s, only really in the last 20 years, I would argue, it's gained considerable momentum. The industry is seeking to create alternatives to conventional, and it's managing to some extent to do that. But there still remains this fundamental tension, which many critics and actors would say on this is a round hole, square peg scenario. You're trying to manipulate the principles of Islam and use benchmarking techniques or the buying and selling of commodities over a couple of seconds to replicate a debt-based, riba-based product. And this is the synthetic engineering which critics have pointed to the Islamic finance industry. I do feel, though, whilst you have to acknowledge the criticisms and the challenges which are there, I still think a lot of regard and appreciation must be given to the early pioneers, many of who unfortunately have passed away, like recently Sheikh Saleh Kamel and others have passed away, and they really genuinely did try to find alternatives for the Muslim community. And also the Muslim community, all of us watching this today, or many of us watching this today, have also been expecting products to mimic what they're getting conventionally. So they have also gone to Islamic banks and said, well, I can get this at this price conventionally. Why can you not simply mirror that? So it has been an awkward kind of paradigm within which Islamic finance has evolved. And this has led to the nature and the shape of the industry as we see it today. And there are certain opportunities, I think the industry might have missed or is missing to some extent. And that is the opportunity to create financial products based on the maqasid of Sharia, not just the strict Sharia compliance structures that are put in place. So alongside that, also to be based on the maqasid. And what do I mean by that? I mean the opportunity to create financial products which are not only meeting the customer requirements, but are also pointing and encouraging behavior which is socially useful and can address some of the contemporary societal issues. After the global financial crisis, Lord Turner, the former head of the FSA, the UK regulator, made a comment about much of banking being socially useless. And what we've seen since is this increasing demand, at least in the global north and in the Western economies, I can speak for the UK primarily, is this desire to see finance be used for social good, and be that through the world of impact investing, ESG investing, and so on. And I'll come back to that shortly. So that's what we've seen within the Islamic finance world. We've seen this issue of aspirational dissatisfaction, where people had hoped and expected the industry to be doing more. But it seems like whilst it's got off to a very good start, we've managed to replicate certain products. So you can buy your car using Sharia compliant financing. You can buy your home using Sharia compliant financing. You can have a deposit account and so on. There is a sukuk market. There are global stock screens there. It seems like the industry is kind of beginning to stagnate somewhat. In the most advanced economies where there's majority Muslim populations, be that Malaysia or Pakistan, we're only seeing 15 to maybe 20% market penetration of Islamic banking. Now, for many years, we've written that we've seen that positive growth, and we've said, well, that's justified or explained through the fact that the industry is still young. And to some extent, that is a valid approach. But we are seeing rapidly fast changes in the global financial markets and changing consumer behavior and expectations. So again, that is something which we feel will impact the industry going forward. And therein remains the challenge for Islamic finance, which we have often termed as moving from halal, the first phase of Islamic finance, which was successfully created by the pioneers, but moving from halal to complement that and augment that by moving to tayyib. And we know these gradations from Quran is often described certain things are halal and tayyib, halal and tayyib. And tayyib being a deeper shade, or halal plus, or a deeper shade of green, if I can use that term in the context of this presentation. There are positive signs we've seen, like the issuance of green sukuk, which was done by the first sovereign one being done by the Ministry of Finance in Indonesia. I believe there was one in the UAE as well. I think it was Majid Al Futtaim Group issued one, or one of the families there issued, commercial families issued a green sukuk as well. And indeed, more recently, the Islamic Development Bank as well have successfully, earlier this year, issued a green sukuk. We at the UK Islamic Finance Council set up the global Islamic Finance and UN SDGs, that's the Sustainable Development Goals. For those of you old enough, you remember the Millennium Development Goals. This is the next version of that, which is to be achieved by 2030 and has 17 very specific goals, underpinned by 169 targets and 230 indicators, which are to be achieved by 2030, addressing the issues such as poverty, gender, climate, biodiversity, etc. So we set up that task force together with IDB and other core stakeholders. The UK government was the initial founding host country partner for that, and more recently the State Bank of Pakistan have also joined this initiative as well, where we're looking to try and align Islamic finance as it is today alongside the SDGs and the broader ESG boom that we're seeing in the conventional markets. So that's just, I think, where we are with regards to Islamic finance today. I'm not going to go into the detail of how a product works. I think that'll eat up all the time. But that's where we are as an industry, and that's the journey that we've been on, and where this relates to the green recovery and an ethical economy. So let's go and ask the question, what is an ethical economy? What can it look like? And I'm going to, again, my caveat, probably should have said earlier, is I'm just sharing some thoughts and reflections, and these are very much from a practitioner's perspective. I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to talk through an academic lens, but very much as a practitioner. A financial system that works for people and planet is increasingly the terminology and the discourse that we are seeing in the global north. I think the emergence of the global UN Sustainable Development Goals has helped provide somewhat, or a fast becoming unified kind of global acceptance as to what are the parameters that define this kind of economy. What are the characteristics? People and planet, profit and purpose. This is now fast becoming the overriding terminology. We know within the asset management world, we've used the word ESG, or responsible investing. Nowadays, we hear about the world of sustainable banking. What does all of this actually mean? And why is it all happening and discussing? Why are we all discussing this now? Now, what we have seen, at least in Europe and in the UK, post the global financial crisis in 2008, is this realization of what happened when we pursued unchecked capitalism. What happened when we had shareholder primacy, where the ultimate objective was risk-adjusted, maximizing returns, profits for one specific category, the shareholders. What's happened with regards to the failure, as Piketty has shown, the failure of trickle-down economics. And where is all of this in a kind of post-Friedman era? Although Friedman sometimes is not contextualized because his comments were made within the law, but he very much gave the basis for the only purpose of business should be to generate profits. And John Kay did a fascinating presentation on this at one of our conferences in Edinburgh, actually, where he showed the financial statements of companies going back over kind of 40, 50 years, and how the mission statement of a company being built around some inherent purpose and benefit to society, how that increasingly kind of diluted and was removed from ultimately, or brought down to a very basic level or minimalistic level within the reports of these companies. So we've gone through a period, I think, post Big Bang and Bretton Woods, of the liberalization of global financial markets, which has led to this kind of mindset of seeking out profit at all cost. And now we're seeing this massive reverberation. We're seeing this massive kind of pushback now. And I think COVID has further amplified that, because it has actually highlighted ultimately the human fragility and how we're all actually in this in one way together, because the virus cuts across geographies. So what is it that we are actually kind of seeing? We're seeing a number of issues arising. These issues are now around climate and biodiversity. So you talked about a green recovery. Why does it have to be green? Well, because climate is at an extremely dangerous point. We're at the point of irreversible damage through the loss of biodiversity. The World Economic Forum have put biodiversity now as a top 3 global risk. Climate has been there for a long time, but people have been somewhat ignoring it. But now I think the skeptics can no longer deny that there is climate change, and this is having considerable damage on the world and on our ecosystem and on our planet. And all of this ultimately translates into risk for financial institutions that we need to understand. There's no point saving for your retirement if there's not going to be much of a planet to save for. And as Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, highlighted the 3 R's with regards to how to approach this. But one of the most poignant things I think he's referred to is the tragedy of horizons, which is the risk that when we figure out that, well, actually, this is really, really serious, it might be too late. So the world is now acting rapidly to try and address climate change. We are seeing this through a number of initiatives. And I make this commentary having been involved in the ethical finance market in London, in the UK, in Edinburgh for over 15 years. And the momentum that I've seen in the last 3 years in mainstream, and I repeat, mainstream conventional markets for ethical, responsible investing in banking and sustainable banking has never been greater. We see this through there's a number of touch points which can help, which indicate this. Be that the $80 trillion plus signed up to the UN Principles of Responsible Investing, be that the growth of the impact investing market, now worth over 750 billion, or the disclosure requirements from TCFD and others, or the emergence of the green loan principles, green bond principles, the net zero campaigns, how companies and businesses from Lloyd's Banking Group through to BP, who is a traditional fossil fuels sector, all committing to net zero, i.e. their carbon emissions will be net zero within the next 20, 30 years. So we are seeing a massive rapid change towards this. More recently, some other positive momentum towards the Paris Accord, which is the global climate summit, which indeed will be hosted next year in Glasgow, in my hometown, where the countries come together and they make commitments from the global north and global south to limit the carbon emissions. They put the NDCs in place. That this race to net zero, we're seeing increasing rapidly. With recent announcements from China, from Biden, President-elect Biden, who noted climate as a top 2 political priority for him and his administration coming in. along with and the commitment, therefore, to go back into the Paris Accord and so on. And indeed, along with the UK government recently announcing a couple of weeks ago, for the first time ever, it's going to issue a green sovereign bond. These are collectively really, really positive signs. And if we look at this in further detail, and then I'll conclude with some views on where back to Islamic finance and bring in Awqaf as to where I think we need to consider as Muslim communities our role in all of this. You know, if we take this issue of people and planet, profit and purpose, even beyond E for environment within ESG, that's the terminology that's historically been used. Beyond the green debate, the S for social, these factors are coming in rapidly as well. So it's not just about climate and biodiversity. And by the way, you'll find many, you know, leading financial institutions in sub-Saharan Africa say, look, climate, frankly, we totally appreciate and understand, but our people are dying from poverty. We have issues in education. We have issues around infrastructure. So our priorities are have to be placed in these areas. So beyond the kind of E within ESG, beyond the environment and climate, we still see that we have massive, deep systemic issues that need to be addressed. And that's where the Sustainable Development Goals, you know, cover a whole host of issues. And, you know, we are seeing this as still problematic and challenging. There's no point kind of living in a world where the climate works, but you are not being treated with respect. You don't have the rule of law around you. You don't have opportunity in life. You don't have hope. So all of these things are equally as important. And we're seeing this, for example, in supply chain areas where companies in Europe are using, you know, child labor in sweatshops in other countries like Bangladesh and so on to help in the industry of fast fashion or whatever that is. We're seeing other massive systemic issues we find with regards to things like Black Lives Matter movement, you know, where there's systemic racism or there's unconscious bias, you know. And even at a macro level, when you really begin to unpack this, you see some really worrying signs, which is the system, the mechanisms that we have used predominantly over the last century, are they really fit for purpose? So have we been accounting for the damage that we do when we pollute a river in our financial accounts? You know, have we been accounting for this correctly? No, we haven't. We've actually never looked at this. We've never accounted for this. And there is a price that can be allocated against the use and the consequences on our natural planetary assets, our natural landscape and capital. Even at a fundamental level now, people are beginning to question these things, such as GDP, thinking beyond GDP. The whole well-being economy is now beginning to emerge, where people like the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, she's talked very extensively on this. You know, she's done a fantastic TED talk I would highly recommend to look at. And also very commendably, the UAE, I believe, had the very first Minister for Happiness, a lady by the name of Wahud bint Khalfan, I believe, which shows some progressive thinking, you know, to think beyond GDP. So let's begin to define ourselves and our understanding of who we are and our purpose beyond this framework that's been put on us through this unchecked capitalism model, you know, where ultimately we chase the dunya, you know, like as if we're chasing our tails. Yet actually there is other factors which are important, such as barakah, we know in the Islamic tradition, or such as happiness, as the well-being economy and others promote. And it's intriguing to note, both in the UAE and in Scotland, there's two women who are promoting this concept of thinking of you know, beyond GDP, of happiness and of well-being, which has a lot to say as well in a particularly male-dominated financial services world. where I think there's much to be said about bringing in people who are a lot more emotionally intelligent than many men are. And people have written about this extensely, how male egos help to drive the trading behavior, aggressive trading behavior, which compounded the global financial crisis. So there's a number of deep systemic issues, and to me, ultimately, this all comes down to an ontological challenge, a question of rethinking capitalism, reforming capitalism in a way which can drive a more ethical economy. And the challenge for us, for you and for me, is really to figure out what can Islam contribute to this global debate. And this global debate is happening, and Islamic finance right now is not really at the table. This debate is happening. We're seeing Mark Carney, we're seeing Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, really championing this concept of profit and purpose. We're seeing entrepreneurs and businesses saying, whatever we do, we have to have a social purpose. We're seeing millennials wanting to work for these type of institutions rather than just those which are high-end profit maximization focused only. We're seeing the debate move from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And to me, this ultimately, in a weird way for me, sitting in Scotland, a country which contributed to the Enlightenment disproportionately, is fascinating, because I think this is the same question Adam Smith was trying to reconcile. He was often credited as the father of modern capitalism. When Smith was sitting in Panmure House and indeed in Glasgow University as the first chair of moral philosophy, something people often forget, before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, his writings before that, the theory of moral sentiments. He was sitting and he had these two interesting influences, Hutcheson and Hume, his two great mentors and friends. One person pushing you towards evidence-based self-interest being the primary force, and the other individual, Hutcheson, a man of God, who was pushing him towards, people do things for the innate goodness within it. And I think globally we are now back at this similar oscillation point, where we are now once again recalibrating profit and purpose, and which one has primacy, and what's the balance between these two. So that's where we're seeing some thoughts there, and the question and the opportunity really lies for, I guess the question is, what is the opportunity for the Islamic economies, and what is the opportunity for all of us within the Muslim communities? I think, and I'm going to leave you with some thoughts on this. I think it is commendable. Again, I know in Dubai you have the Islamic Economy Initiative. So I think it is commendable that thought is beginning to be applied towards this. I think the conversation that we're having because of COVID is not just how can we recover, but how can we fundamentally drive a renewal, meaning not just fix the old system, because frankly, the old system is broke from everything I've just explained, right? But how can we build a new system, a renewal? How can we replumb the system? And I think this is an opportunity for the OIC countries and everyone who doesn't have the baggage of legacy systems. It's a bit like technology. Anyone in the tech space or has got a technology system in their institution will know you're always encumbered with the legacy system and the infrastructure that brings. And sometimes it's easier just to wipe the slate clean and start afresh, with the latest technology, with the latest tools that we have in society. And that's where I think there's an opportunity to leapfrog a whole phase of development which other economies might have gone through in the global north. What are we talking about here? What do I mean by this? I mean things like off-grid energy solutions. Yeah. Why do we have the big IPPs and we're losing 7 to 10% of the energy through these massive kind of wires which go A to Z, right? How much of our economies and our countries actually have sustainable, well-working energy grids? What is the opportunity to use green energy to create off-grid solutions, localized off-grid solutions? How can we start thinking about using offtake, using waste from one input, the waste of one input, and using that to drive another process? So the heat waste from refrigeration, cooling, how, using our natural resources in a way that can drive this, to underpin all of this. So big data centers, all of us are talking via Zoom. Well, guess what? This is a server somewhere in a server room, which is requiring a lot of energy to cool it. Now, what they're beginning to do in Norway and other countries is to immerse these data servers into existing lakes and fjords and lochs to cool them down. So what can we use to integrate nature to create the solutions that we need? People are looking at converting sound, which is a byproduct at airports, into energy. So how can we actually be creative and replumb the whole system? Look at what is a waste product or a byproduct from some other process, but convert that into an input for an alternative process. And how fundamentally can we use nature to underpin all of this? So therein, I feel, lies the opportunity. But to mobilize that opportunity, I think there is some missing ingredients. And one of them is clearly the finance. And that, to me, is where the Awqaf needs to step in. Because Islamic finance industry, as it is, as I described at the beginning of this presentation, is very much focused on adaptation and commercial returns. If we want money which is patient capital, which is innovative, and will drive social outcomes as much as commercial outcomes, that is where the Awqaf sector needs to step up and come forward. Can the Awqaf sector do that? I don't know. I don't know how brave it can be in such. I don't know which of the WACs are set up in a way that are doing good quality asset allocation, that are measuring social returns and reporting on this alongside financial returns. My gut feel is very few of them actually are, having looked at this. But that's where I see the opportunity lies. And if you can just innovate and lead and create an example, you might be able to crowd in and encourage the rest of the industry to go in that direction. So there are opportunities for blended finance, where you put together commercial capital with social capital to create outcomes that you're looking for, and those outcomes have positive economic impacts by either reducing cost on the state or indeed reducing or improving social outcomes for that. And some of the examples are like where Khazanah did social impact bonds, a Sharia compliant social impact sukuk, which reduced the cost of capital to schools who are performing better. The outcome, the children's students' grades were of a higher quality. The return given to the bondholder or the sukuk holder was reduced. So that's where I see the opportunity to lies for Islamic finance and Awqaf, to really see where it can replumb the whole thing. So we shouldn't just recover and go back to where we were. Frankly, I think, Dr. Chai, if we were just to recover and end up where we were pre-COVID, we would have lost one of the biggest opportunities in a generation. The opportunity is not purely to recover. The opportunity is to renew, to rebuild, to build a system which is more equitable, more socially aligned, with nature at its very heart as a tool, not something that we just disregard and we dump and we pollute, and create a mindset and a culture which accompanies this, one which is probably more aligned with Islamic principles of barakah, of akhirah, of accountability, of taking happiness and well-being in whatever you have, rather than one which is in the ultimate pursuit of self-interest, unchecked self-interest. Therein, I think, lies the opportunity, and there's always a natural balance there in each sector, and everyone is different. And I totally appreciate someone like me speaking about this in the UK is a very different challenge to someone living in the global south in poverty and difficult economic circumstances. But the principles have to be the same that we seek to aspire towards, and I strongly believe that these principles enshrined within the maqasid of Sharia can contribute considerably, not just to the Muslim communities and the OIC world, but actually it can contribute massively to the global world of people of faith and people of no faith, varying faiths and of no faith, I should say. They are dying out, crying out, looking for an alternative system that is more just and more equitable. And on that note, Dr. Yusuf, if you allow me, I will conclude and leave a few minutes for any Q&A.
Thank you, Mr. Omar, for this thought-provoking presentation on ethical economy, green recovery, and Islamic finance and Awqaf. I think you masterly connect these two important goals. Our goals, either as a community, as a society, or as a nations, to be both has social purpose, responsibilities, as well as commercial returns. And these two goals, I think, is both needed for human societies to evolve and to progress. So we have a few questions from our audience, and if you allow me. First of all, the question is, you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation what is the Islamic finance and economy, and some general observation of status of Islamic banking or Islamic economics or economy. So the assumption here, the question asked, the central notion of Islamic economics in general is to make the wealth in the service of humanity and societies. This is badly needed after this global crisis. So is there a hope to fulfill this goal, regardless of the label, whether you call it Islamic finance or ethical finance? So is there hope to adopt this principle and have this recovery?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, that principle was applicable even pre-COVID. So we saw from Piketty's work that he had proven that trickle-down economics, which was the dominant theory that says it does benefit all of society because it trickles down this economic wealth, actually isn't the case. And some silly number, 97% of the world's assets are owned by less than 0.5% of the population, world's population. So these theories have already been debunked. This lack of fair distribution of wealth and a lack of fair distribution of opportunity, both are challenges of our time, pre-COVID, completely pre-COVID. And the system is such where it is stacked up against certain countries or certain geographies, whereas in the UK we can frankly raise, and the government has, nearly 300 billion from the global financial markets to fund all the programs to sustain the country through COVID. The UK government is now basically sustaining nearly 1/3 of the workforce. We have just over 30 million workforce, and nearly 1/3 of them are getting their wages paid by the government through the schemes which are there. Our debt is now up to 120% GDP. Now, other countries in the world can't do that. They just simply can't go and print the money or raise the money there. So there is definitely structural impediments there, which is people will argue are unfair on the other side. But can we do this? Can the operationalization of this economic principle through the banking and finance system, can we operationalize this in a way which is for the benefit of all in society? I think we can. I absolutely think we can, and I think we must. We don't have a choice anymore. We can no longer continue with the way we've operated, not only because of the lack of distribution and justice and distribution of wealth, but also because the planet which we are living on cannot sustain this anymore. Simple as that. We will not have a planet for our grandchildren and thereafter. And this is on our watch. It's on our time. So The planet has turned around and cried and said, look, we need to stop the way we are operating and become a lot more sustainable. And through that sustainability, we also need to question alongside that, we need to question our, not just sustainability, we need to question our inclusiveness. How inclusive are our economies? How is everyone being taken along? And that's where the Sustainable Development Goals and other such initiatives, such as inclusive economy, are increasing prominence. These views that I'm talking about, in the early 2000s, when I used to work in the city in London, these were views of what was deemed as hippies, tree huggers, socialists, or some religious guys. So very much minority views somewhere out there on the far left. But these have gained massive prominence now across huge movements across society. And I genuinely think, and I probably would not have been as optimistic, but because I have been involved for so long, that I actually do see signs of this. I genuinely think there is there is hope here. But this is where it's so critical, Dr. Chai, where institutions like Awqaf now need to step up. Maybe if they stepped up 20 years ago, it might have been a different outcome. But if they step up today, the global markets are ripe, absolutely ripe, for creating financial products which are based off the principles of mutuality, like we have in Takaful, in Islamic insurance, where social outcomes are valued and aimed for, alongside commercial outcomes, where that spread, where the wealth is spread. Absolutely, I do feel there is an opportunity to now operationalize this economic theory and economic hope to actually play a role. It requires vision, it requires leadership, of vision, bravery, and courage. And that leadership is across the level. It's not just pointing to the top CEO. It's every single individual has got a role to play in the institution in which you work.
Thank you for this hopeful message and for this the future you are describing. I hope all the government and stakeholders will act on this advice, and especially the Awqaf and the Islamic communities which we are related here can act and take this opportunity. Second question is, you mentioned because your hometown from Glasgow, and David Humer and not David, Adam Smith. Actually, I walked in front of his statue when I visited him a few years ago. So it was remarkable personality. As you said, he wrote Moral Sentimentalism Before the Wealth of Nations. So address this seemingly in like a contradiction in human nature or in our society. It's like one side is profit, self-interest. The other side, you have to think about social responsibility for morality and ethical considerations. Similarly, we have this kind of a similar dilemma or contradiction in the Chinese Muslim context. Something for example, halal food or halal economy is translated into Chinese called qingzhen, means pure and clean. Pure and clean. Okay, so everything you do must be pure and clean, including like the money you spend, the business you run, and etc. So how is it possible? How, from your perspective, from your experience, from a practitioner, things we've heard a lot of theoretical stuff, philosophical debate and Islamic theological debate. But what is in practice, how these two goals can be, make it compatible, make it Islamic economic transactions, and especially like in non-Muslim, when you deal with non-Muslims, like in UK, in China, how that they will adopt this, yeah.
So let me answer that through two examples of what happens if you don't do what you've just said. Yeah. So one example is Boohoo, a fast fashion clothing retail company, which a few months ago it was even though this was in the top quartile of the MSCI Sustainability Index for its peer group, it recently during COVID, it was discovered that they were using terrible working conditions in manufacturing sweatshops in Leicester. Even during COVID times, they weren't having the proper protocols in place. And when that was discovered, their stock price got absolutely hammered. Their stock prices literally collapsed. Yep. So now this is a real risk, because the markets get information very fast, be it through Facebook, be it through Twitter, be it through whatever means of news that we see today. There is a massive risk here that if you are not following the right protocols, that this will be uncovered and this will impact your stock price considerably. So this, to me, there's a movement now that's happened in the last 15 years. I think we are at a tipping point where you can, at least in Europe, you can no longer be seen to be doing nothing. And that's a very powerful place to be. Before, these are all nice to do. We're here to make profit. If we can do some nice things on the side, we'll do it. Some people called it CSR, a few donations to the local church, the local children's football club or whatever. Now it's no longer like a CSR debate. This is now front and center and core to your business. And indeed, the way the regulators are moving with TCFD or the integrated reporting requirements and the governance requirements, these are now, you're having to disclose on these factors. Another example, which was shared by Paul Pullman, former CEO of Unilever, they put an advert for the exact same job in Unilever, but they changed the advert and they made two versions of the advert. One of the adverts said, really well paid, bonus, high profitable company, come and work for us in this department and do ABCD. The other one, for the exact same job, the other advert talked about how this department creates products that help society, and these are the issues in society, and this is how you can help people through the products that we create at Unilever. And what he mentioned was fascinating. He goes, they had nearly 7 times more applicants to the ones to the job, to the one which highlighted the social purpose of the job, rather than the one which highlighted the fantastic pay rate. Even though the pay was exactly the same, the job was exactly the same, and so on. So I think we are now actually seeing from millennials and others a genuine desire to be associated with things which have a purpose. And I think you're going to recruit the best talent, you're going to attract the best people, and you're going to get an energy and an enthusiasm which is always more beneficial, if I can put it that way, for any commercial outfit, to have a staff or workforce which are genuinely engaged and passionate. So I absolutely see it through these just small examples of what, you asked me what's happening in Europe, in this part of the world, where this is a reality now. This is a fast becoming reality. We've even seen young millennials or not even millennials, just entrepreneurs who have turned around and disregarded the money of investors because they weren't bringing any additional value add beyond the money in the dollars, which is a very brave thing to say, that where they didn't feel the investors were aligned with the social objectives of their company, or they didn't demonstrate enough. So that's very brave. And when you unpack that a bit, you realize that when they turn around and say, well, we've grown up since the financial crisis. We've lived in a world of uncertainty from the outset. So we can be a bit more brave to turn around and say no to certain investors and money, which traditionally you would just bite their hand off and just take the most you're given,
Great. Thank you for the answer and for this good examples of that seeing millennials in Europe are taking up this ethical consideration when they are pursuing their business and their career. Let's continue this conversation. In fact, there's our colleague, he noticed that English Trust, the famous English Trust, actually is the embodiment kind of Islamic Awqaf. Okay. It's all continuation of the Awqaf in Islamic history, which is like made us all very proud that it has contributed to both society and to the business. Now, if Awqaf is meant to be, open, and mean to be sustainability, because sometimes people translate it into endowment or sometimes charity. Maybe in this context, maybe you agree, or my colleague, they might agree that translate into a sustainability, growth. So you are the leading figure of Islamic finance and Awqaf initiative in the UK. What best practice or the kind of man you think you should give to offer to our audience for them to take away, and so that they can apply it or they can get inspiration for their own communities? Yeah.
So Awqaf, I cannot say enough how centrally important it is, because of the fundamental nature of its balance sheet, of its money, its long-term indefinite capital, which is, as you said, Dr. Chai, sustainable, always generating revenue. And you're absolutely right. The world of trusts and endowments in the UK, which underpin many, institutions, family offices, or indeed educational institutions, which were amongst the first to use the trusts and endowments, all of them came through the Venetian scholars who took it from the Arab world. To the extent that all this trust document in Britain, I believe, or one of the oldest, is Merton College in Oxford. And if you look at its document that they still have in their archives, as we say, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, they literally copied it to the extent that they said, in the name of, I believe it's in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, most gracious, most merciful. so literally they've copied the actual documentation that underpins this. But the nature of this, you have to understand why this is so powerful, because conventional banks, conventional financial institutions suffer massively from short-termism, right? So the time horizons mismatch is just huge. Children go through school over 7 years or whatever that is, or get an education over 12, 14 years. If your financial horizon is 3 to 5 years, there's a mismatch, fundamental mismatch. Yeah. If the damage to the climate is measured in a decade cycle, or in 50-year cycles, there's fundamental time horizon mismatches. So that's where I think that Awqaf can really help deal in 3 specific areas. One is address the short-termism nature of which conventional financial institutions can't do. We are badly suffer from this issue across global financial markets. Secondly, it can help fund the transition period, because it's the transition period where you have to try new innovative technologies, innovative approaches, to address some of the big issues that we see in society, or even indeed financial innovation. And the third one is blended finance. If you have an institution that will turn around and say, tell me, before you tell me how much money I made, how much social impact did I make? And that is as important as how much return I've made, or how much social impact I've made through, of course, the yield of the Awqaf is dedicated purely for social impact, The actual balance sheet is meant to be managed in a low-risk capital preservation method. Very few Awqaf actually look at impact investing techniques as a way of allocating their capital. I doubt that they have sophisticated capital allocation strategies either. So there's some very practical things that Awqaf can do. And just understanding, if you had an Islamic bank, going back to Islamic finance, so we recreated home purchase plans. But guess what we did with the rent? We said, we won't charge you interest on the mortgage. We'll call it a home purchase plan. We'll charge you rent. But what did we do on the rent? And let's be honest and frank. We said the rent we charge you, we will benchmark that on bank interest rates, right? And that's normally the point at which most people, retail, average public who are not financially sophisticated, get confused and say, but you just told me it's rent. But now you're telling me the rent, pricing of the rent is benchmarked directly off interest rates. And it loses credibility, loses authenticity. Why? Because banks, their balance sheets, they need to go to the capital markets to borrow money. So they are fundamentally driven by the pulse of rent. But if you go to an Awqaf institution, which has a $200 billion waqf, and that's their balance sheet, they can determine what price they want to do it at. They don't have to go to the markets to borrow money on a daily basis or periodic basis. So they can determine how they want to charge rent, and they could make a rent benchmark based on what's the rent in that locality, and I'll adjust it for the nature of this relationship. So, but the Awqaf is empowered to do things which conventional financial institutions, including Islamic, cannot do fundamentally, and it is built for this purpose of goodness, of khair, not shareholders. There's no shareholders, yeah. There's no shareholder saying my bank's not making enough money. I'm going to change the strategy. I'm going to stop doing this. I'm going to stop doing that. No, they're built for the purpose of khair and goodness, and they have integrated into their core finance, because it has to be through the returns, financial investment, the returns. So they should be understanding that finance piece, but they need to play to it a lot more, and they can really, really supercharge and help take, together with the great work the founders of contemporary Islamic finance have done, they can supercharge it, come together and build a world of not just halal products, but of tayyib products, ones which are combining financial returns, genuine social impact, and are of use to everyone in society, not just Muslims.
Great. Yeah, this is a very insightful suggestion you are giving for our communities. Last but not the least, you mentioned about this a few initiatives by the UAE, and both in terms of the green economy, or let's say, or green strategy they are doing. In fact, UAE has the minister of, not only minister of happiness, but also have minister of climate change. So the government really put this ethical and green recovery, green economy at the top priority of the country. In the meantime, UAE is also, especially Dubai, is also a pioneer, or has been really moving fast in becoming a capital of Islamic economy. Since 1975, Dubai established the first Islamic bank. And a few years ago, they started, Dubai will become a global capital of the Islamic economy. So it seems that there's a new hope for Islamic banking and finance, insurance, halal food, Islamic lifestyle, and everything, Islamic tourism, etc., to green from this part of the world. So how do you comment on this initiative, or what do you see this initiative? What's the future for this?
Very, very simply, it's very admirable. It's very commendable, the work Abdullah Alawar has done and his team at the Dubai Islamic Economy. As I mentioned earlier, about having even a minister of happiness and as a climate. Now, many countries will have ministers responsible for climate. It's the work they've done at Masdar in Abu Dhabi as well was pioneering. So clearly, you've got the ability to be visionaries in the region and to be pioneering. My suggestion would be, though, is maybe see how you can address a solution for the world. And by doing that, you will address the solution for the Islamic economies rather than trying to address the solution for the Islamic economies.
Great. Thank you so much, Brother Omar, for this wonderful presentation and insightful Q&A session. And we hope your advice and your knowledge will benefit all of our listeners today. We hope to see you more in the future events.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chai, and forgive my shortcomings. I hope that was of use to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's just right on time. So thank you so much, and thanks for all the viewers, and thanks for listening. Have a wonderful day. Ma salam.
Salam.